You'll be temporary, then gone. She hissed like she was delivering a curse instead of a volunteer agreement. I hadn't even taken my lawn chair off the porch yet. The fluorescent lights in the community center buzzed above her HOA throne of fake potted plants and motivational posters screaming community harmony or else. Progress, not perfection, glared at me from behind her shoulder like a threat. She slid the 90-day committee agreement toward me with the kind of smirk you earn from backstabbing 3 board members in one term. I didn't blink, just picked up the pen, signed the line marked temporary compliance reviewer, and nodded. Not a single muscle moved in my face. Not because I didn't feel anything. God, I felt everything, but because the last time I made a face in this neighborhood, I ended up fine out of my mind and watching the people who stole from the dues fund get reelected. Now, I was back, and they didn't even recognize me. Somewhere under the suburban mom blazer and new haircut, the woman they steamrolled 5 years ago still had unfinished business and a folder buried in the bottom of her tote with the same initials and timestamp from the last audit they tried to bury. By the way, if you're even half invested in stories like this, take 3 seconds to hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people watch and never do. It's a small click, but it really keeps this whole machine running. Appreciate it more than you know. Back to hell. The folder she gave me had my objectives in neat bullet points. Archive reconciliation, temp maintenance ledger cleanup, non-essential audit review. Non-essential, huh? That's how they labeled the exact document trail I flagged 5 years ago. The one that mysteriously vanished after I was let go due to a fabricated rule violation about my mailbox flag being 2 inches too wide. They call me back now because nobody else wanted to touch their ancient mess of HOA dues. They just didn't realize it was the same mess I'd already seen up close. Back then, I was naive enough to ask questions. Now, I already knew the answers. I just needed proof. The neighborhood looked different on the surface. Sure, freshly painted curbs, new speed bumps that screamed safety but whispered control, a fresh coat of HOA-approved beige on every fence meant to scream perfection and whisper, "Don't question us." But the rot was the same. I could smell it behind the compliments the board gave each other at monthly meetings and the forced potluck team huddles. I could see it in the way the HOA president shook my hand, but didn't ask my name. I was a placeholder to them, a living, breathing clipboard they could unplug when the quarter ended. But I wasn't here to be remembered. I was here to remember for them. And I remembered everything. That afternoon, I sat at a dusty folding table near the community center printer no one used. I logged in with a temp ID. My password was some auto-generated gibberish. F3KICX7. I didn't change it. Let them track the fake login all they want. My real work wasn't happening on their volunteer time card. I unzipped the side pocket of my tote bag, pulled out the 5-year-old folder. It was soft from wear. The ink on the cover faded but still legible. HOA 2018 deferred dues and exceptions. I flipped it open and stared at the printed ledger line that started it all. $132,000 diverted. Labeled as temporary landscaping reconciliation, signed off by someone who no longer sat on the board. Or so I thought, because when I walked past the executive boardroom on the way to refill my stale coffee pod from the communal machine, I saw her. The same person who laughed at me in that exit potluck 5 years ago, now HOA president. She looked up right through me. Not a flicker of recognition. That was her first mistake. I didn't plan to be loud. I didn't need a grand speech or a viral neighborhood Facebook meltdown. No, I had 90 days, maybe less. But that's all I needed because they invited me in thinking I was temporary. And I never forgot what it felt like to be erased. Second day on the job, I opened a ledger file and froze mid-sip of coffee. Not because the numbers were shocking yet, but because the formatting hit me like a slap. Decimal placement, column spacing, the way temp payments were lumped under a generic subheader labeled operational fluidity. No treasurer calls it that. I called it that 5 years ago when I tried to flag operational fluidity as the exact pocket they were using to stash board bonuses, landscaping reroutes, and hush money for projects that never actually happened. They took my file, scrubbed my name, and reused it like a napkin, but the bastards missed a spot. I clicked properties on the spreadsheet. Creation date, October 2018. Original author, my old ID string, Elder 223FI. I felt the heat rise up my neck. Resentment, sure, but also this sick sort of satisfaction, like finding your initials carved into a tree after everyone said it had been chopped down. They erased me, but not my fingerprints. I clicked deeper, comparing totals across the quarterly dues budget approvals. There it was, a repeating anomaly. Every Q4 since 2019 showed a sudden spike in contractor payouts just beneath the reporting threshold that required a second sign-off, split across departments disguised as churn. But contractors don't get bonuses unless they aren't really contractors. I opened the archived board memos they'd given me for context. Most were generic nonsense. Vacation policies for the pool, team wins about new flower beds, stupid birthday announcements for compliant residents, but one buried update from late 2021 caught my eye. A new role classification introduced for seasonal project efficiency advisors. Sounded fake. I checked the vendor logs. No such title in any real contract, but there they were listed in the finance records as receiving end-of-year adjustments. One of them was paid $48,000 on top of their base invoice. That's not a temp gig. That's hush money. I cross-checked the name. No public profile. No contractor ID. But her email's still active. Still forwarding to the HOA president. Now the fire was real. Not the dramatic kind. The cold kind that settles into your gut and whispers, "Don't stop." Now I was seeing it for what it was. Not just a paper trail, but a pattern, a system. These temporary line items weren't accidents. They were the new shell game. Redirect, rename, reclassify, and bury the bonus under 5 layers of semantic camouflage. And I remember them laughing when I first tried to explain it. The treasurer at the time had chuckled and said, "We appreciate your thoroughness." The president called it over-reporting. My old committee chair just stopped inviting me to meetings, but they didn't delete everything. They just archived it and hoped I wouldn't come back. Except now I had access again. And I wasn't alone. I copied 3 files to a blank flash drive, the cheap kind you get in neighborhood welcome bags. I labeled it with one word, echo, because that's what this was, an echo of what I already screamed 5 years ago. Only this time, it wasn't going to fade. It was going to bounce back so loud even the community center wouldn't be able to ignore it. I clicked open a private folder in my temp drive. Started building a timeline, a map, and every number I typed wasn't just data. It was a nail. And this time, I wasn't building a report. I was building a coffin. I started showing up to every board meeting with a legal pad and the dumbest look I could manage without drooling. Wide eyes, tight-lipped nods, and a pen that clicked just a little too often. Still learning the ropes, I said to Angela from the Rules Committee as she dumped another folder of old backlog on my folding table. She smiled like I was a toddler who just found the potty. "It's just temp work," she chirped. No pressure. That was the point. They weren't watching me because they didn't think I mattered. I wasn't a threat. I was a placeholder, some disposable number stacker to organize the years of rot. They never wanted to face themselves. They had no clue I was using every cleanup assignment as a reverse-engineered autopsy. Every folder they handed me was one more bone from the skeleton closet I'd already mapped out in my head. They wanted a financial review. Fine. I gave them one. I opened a blank Excel doc, formatted it like every report I used to send in my old role. Color-coded, neatly justified with perfectly aligned column headers. I even included their stupid HOA logo and beige font like a true compliant resident. But this version, it was clean, polished, harmless. Looked like I'd spent all week sorting pool invoices and supply reimbursements, a snooze fest of penny-level corrections, and vaguely worded reconciliation suggestions. I titled it Q1 Ledger Integrity Review Draft A. Then I opened a second doc. No formatting, no fluff, just numbers, signatures, payment paths, and emails. I stripped out the lipstick and kept the blood. Called it Revision V2. This one told a different story. It showed 3 specific accounts flagged for seasonal contractor overages that didn't match any actual staffing logs. Showed how bonuses were moved into those buckets and kicked back through secondary vendors, some of which didn't even have a registered address. I traced one payment all the way to a ghost LLC in Delaware that was dissolved a month after receiving $82,000 in consulting adjustment fees. But the real art wasn't the spreadsheets. It was the draft email. I copied the internal compliance mailing list into the field. Then I deleted it, replaced it with a different address, the State Office of Consumer Affairs, HOA Oversight Division. Then I added a second one, an encrypted tip line run by the state's Business Ethics Board. No subject line yet, no attachments, just a shell of a message. I stared at that too. Felt like it was a detonator. Then I hit Save Draft. That single move, 5 keystrokes, held more power than any speech, any lawsuit, any HOA slap on the wrist. I didn't need a lawyer. I didn't need a protest sign or a viral neighborhood app hashtag. I had the facts, their facts, the ones they thought they buried under turnover and jargon. I clicked back into the first version of the report, the vanilla one. I attached it to a friendly email addressed to Angela. Added a smiley face. Let me know if you'd like any changes before routing up. She replied in under 4 minutes. Looks great. You're really getting the hang of things, smiley face. I leaned back in my chair, watching the community center move like nothing was coming. Rules committee reps chatting about baby showers for compliant families. Treasurer heads booking golf trips with consultants. Nobody noticed the draft title beta just sitting there. Nobody noticed the mask I wore in meetings, nodding along, sipping burned coffee from my HOA mug. They didn't know that behind that mask was the same woman they silenced 5 years ago. And this time I wasn't asking for a seat at the table. I was setting the table. There's a kind of silence that only exists after midnight in a community center. The HVAC hums like a bored predator, and the motion sensor lights forget you exist unless you wave like an idiot every 10 minutes. I stayed late under the pretense of catching up on reconciliations, which in HOA speak means I was invisible and everyone was grateful for it. No one questions an attempt at working too hard because they think you're trying to earn permanence. They think you want to be them. I didn't. I wanted to bury them with their own receipts. By the third night, I had pinned down the pattern. Every fiscal year ended with a savings adjustment line item that magically aligned with quarter-specific fines on residents, budget freezes, and most conveniently, missing audit follow-ups. The numbers were spread like oil slicks, meant to look like anomalies you could ignore. But I wasn't looking at one file. I was reconstructing years of them, side by side, layered, labeled. Each time a savings was recorded, another line appeared in the vendor payouts, usually under some rebranded initiative like efficiency, onboarding, or project realignment compensation. They were careful not to reuse the same wording twice. That was their game. Changed just enough to break the pattern recognition of a casual reviewer. But they didn't count on me remembering every single variation I'd already reported, once only to be ignored and discarded. So I built a new timeline, dates, signatures, vendor IDs, transfer logs. I cross-referenced board changes and meeting memos, tracked who was present at what sign-off meetings, who reviewed disbursement schedules, and most importantly, who wasn't there when the numbers went south. Turns out the absences weren't random. 3 people consistently ghosted compliance checks: a senior VP in strategy, the deputy treasurer, and Melissa, a name I hadn't seen on the official roster in 5 years because the last time I saw her, she was holding my termination paperwork and pretending she was just as surprised as me. Melissa now held the title head of HOA compliance, and her name was on a spreadsheet I never should have seen. I found it while digging through archived finance handovers labeled internal transfer notes. Most were boring, but one Excel file deep in a folder tree called FI 2020 Retention was password protected with the name of a retired controller. Clearly meant to keep eyes out, not in. I cracked it with an old password pattern I remembered from my days as staff. Fiscal Y20 plus the initials, first try. Inside a raw dump of deferred dues approvals, not the public-facing versions the board submits. This was internal, messy, untitled tabs, sell comments, real-time notes like hold this till Q2, push through after fines, signed off via phone, no timestamp. But the gold, a tab labeled Q4 special adjustments final that showed 5 disbursements rerouted from resident bonus pools into one temporary contractor budget code, EV14. Melissa's initials were in the comment column next to each. Just a tiny emoji followed by 3 letters that made me laugh out loud. Right there in that empty community center, per usual. She'd done it before. She'd done it so often they had a shorthand for it. Grim satisfaction doesn't even cover it. I wasn't piecing together a mystery. I was reading a confession. I sat there staring at that spreadsheet, thinking about all the performance reviews I sat through, all the budget constraints they threw at my face while quietly wiring thousands through shell vendors. They cut resident refunds to stay lean and fun and funneled the leftovers to their friends. And Melissa, she didn't just know, she owned it. I closed the file, backed it up to 2 separate flash drives, one labeled beta, one labeled ghost, and I updated the draft email still sitting quietly in my outbox. I didn't need to write a warning. I was the warning. By Friday, I'd heard great work, really thorough, more times than I could count, mostly from people who hadn't read a single word I wrote. The rules committee printed out my sanitized version, hole-punched it like it was scripture, and proudly slid it into a binder labeled Internal Review Satisfactory. The pages looked official, authoritative, and completely hollow. It was a beige wall of words, vendor codes, meaningless ledger summaries, and just enough corporate lingo to lull anyone into thinking it was legitimate. That was draft A, the decoy, the ghost report designed to pass every cursory glance without sparking even one follow-up question. Angela from the Rules Committee emailed me a smiling emoji with a subject line, "You're a lifesaver." I replied, happy to help, and attached a second PDF called Clean Form 24v3. The file was digital oatmeal. Boring enough to be trusted, invisible enough to disappear. But the real report that one had teeth. I waited until 11:47 p.m. Not midnight. Not some dramatic clock strike moment. Just a quiet, statistically insignificant hour. Most of the neighborhood had gone home hours earlier. VPN logs wouldn't flag a thing. Temps aren't monitored that closely, and it would chalk it up to someone working late. I opened a folder on my personal flash drive labeled beta. No formatting this time, just line after line of transfers, manipulation, and unauthorized sign-offs. Melissa's initials. 3 separate seasonal advisor vendors paid over $200,000 with no corresponding invoice. A spreadsheet showing how $1.2 million in deferred dues over the last 5 years had been rerouted into fake contractor shells, attached emails, metadata, timestamps, change logs. It wasn't just a smoking gun. It was a flamethrower with a signed receipt. The email address was buried on a state website I bookmarked years ago. The Office of Consumer Affairs, HOA Oversight Division, didn't advertise itself with big, bold colors, but their reporting portal worked. Clean, simple, no login required. Just attach the documents, input a summary, and hit send. I kept it surgical. Subject, suspicious financial reallocation / vendor misclassification evidence. Body, please find attached supporting documentation related to bonus reallocation through falsified contractor records and HOA compliance manipulation. All data extracted from the association's internal financial system, time-stamped and attributed. This report includes evidence of falsified approvals and rerouted payments in violation of state HOA reporting compliance. Let me know if additional verification is required. Anonymous attachments. Q4_financial_redistribution_report.pdf audit_evidence.xlsx deferred_logs.message. Then I added one more line. BCC legal-anon at statecompliance.org. They had a division for whistleblowers buried behind HOA firewalls and non-disclosure clauses. Most residents don't know it exists. But 5 years ago, I found it. And this time, I wasn't filing a complaint. I was dropping a dossier. I hovered for half a second, not out of hesitation, but calculation. I wanted to remember this moment. The stillness before the ignition. The hum of the server. The mouse under my hand glowing faint blue. Everything was quiet. And then I clicked send. No fanfare. No fireworks. Just the soft whoosh of a digital payload disappearing into cyberspace like a lit match tossed into gasoline. The oversight office wouldn't call. They wouldn't email. But they'd read every page. And once they did, the clock would start ticking in a direction no one in that community center expected. I unplugged the flash drive, slid it into my pocket, and powered down the computer like nothing happened. When I walked out of the community center, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt ready. Monday morning came in like a fire alarm with no sound, just frantic movement and the smell of something burning beneath the surface. When I stepped onto the sidewalk, you could taste the panic in the air. The executive suite lights in the community center were already on. The usually chipper admin was white-knuckling her coffee cup, eyes darting toward the closed boardroom door like she was waiting for it to explode. Nobody said good morning. Nobody made eye contact. It was glorious. By 9:17, 2 senior board members left that room red-faced and whispering. One of them, the same VP who told me on my first day that temps shouldn't ask questions. His jaw was tight enough to snap a pin. The other one, finance compliance liaison. He looked like someone had just whispered state audit into his ear. Angela didn't make eye contact when she came to find me. Just stood at my table like a funeral director and said, "Can you join us upstairs?" No explanation, no smiley face this time. I stood slowly, careful not to show the flicker of satisfaction tightening behind my ribs. "Sure," I said, grabbing my legal pad. "Let me know if you want to bring the outline you gave me." It's what I followed for the report. Her eyes twitched just once. The conference room had a weird energy like they couldn't decide whether I was the janitor or the arsonist. Melissa wasn't there yet, which told me 2 things. 1, she was already spiraling somewhere else. And 2, they didn't want her in the room when the fire got too close. Legal was in the corner. 2 suits who looked freshly yanked out of their morning espresso run. One of them, the junior associate I remembered from last quarter's contract policy update, kept fidgeting with his sleeve. The other older locked eyes with me and said, "We just have a few questions about your submitted audit." I gave him a slow blink and replied, "Which one?" You could have sliced the silence with a staple remover. Angela leaned forward, fake calm leaking through her pores. "The draft you submitted to us. We believe a different version has made its way to external parties. Do you have any idea how that could have happened?" "I only followed the outline," I said, placing my legal pad on the table. "Line by line. Every field, every log you requested. I didn't include anything beyond the scope." She bristled, then explained how the vendor names and disbursement logs from an internal-only report ended up with, well, let's just say people we don't normally work with. I let the pause stretch long enough for the tension to feel like a second skin. Maybe the same way 5 years of bonus theft got missed, I offered flatly. The room tightened. That's when the junior lawyer cleared his throat. "Could I speak with you privately? Just for a moment." Angela's head whipped toward him. "We're all on the same team here." He shook his head. "I think it's better we do this one-on-one." Briefly, I followed him out to the hallway. He looked like he was trying to remember how to breathe. His voice dropped low, barely above a whisper. "Look, off the record. How deep does it go?" I tilted my head. "How deep does what go?" "The report. What you have. Who you sent it to. Are we talking fines, or are we talking criminal?" I smiled for the first time all morning. "You'll find out when they do." He nodded like a man being handed a countdown. "You should probably get representation," he muttered. I shrugged. "Already have one." 5 years of silence is enough prep for any war. When I returned to the conference room, Angela tried to recover control, thanked me for my time, said they'd circle back once legal clarified a few things. But the way they all avoided my eyes told me what they really saw now. Not a temp, a fuse already lit. The call started before noon. Not emails, not Slack messages, Real phone calls like the kind people make when their usual power play stops working and they suddenly remember you're human or worse, a liability. First, it was legal, pretending it was just a courtesy follow-up, then the rules committee asking if I'd be open to a brief dialogue, and by 3:30, the HOA president herself left a voicemail that ended with, "Let's keep this internal if possible." I believe there's still room for negotiation. It was the word negotiation that finally made me smile. Funny how quickly they discover manners when the rug slips out. They asked me to meet in a different conference room this time, one with no windows, no nameplate on the door, just a quiet hum and a picture of water already sweating on the table like it knew what was coming. I walked in without a notepad, no laptop, just a small black case in my hand. Angela was there again, all faux casual in her soft cardigan and sharpened nails. Across from her sat two new lawyers, external counsel this time, the kind that charges by the minute and specializes in reputational containment. And at the head of the table, arms crossed like he thought it made him look less panicked, sat the president. I hadn't seen him up close since my first week. Back then, he didn't even glance at me. Now he wouldn't stop. "Thanks for coming," he started, trying on a warm tone that didn't fit. "We want to get ahead of this and find a way forward that works for all parties." I said nothing, just sat, opened the black case, and placed a thumb drive on the table. Untouched, still sealed in the packaging. It might as well have been a grenade. Angela shifted in her seat. One of the lawyers cleared his throat and said, "We're prepared to discuss options, assuming there's flexibility on your part. Discretion is valuable to all of us here." I leaned back, studying the room like I was checking the time, not watching them squirm. "What options are you imagining?" I asked flatly. The president jumped in. "Let's talk hypotheticals. If someone were in possession of documents that could be misconstrued and those documents were shared in error, perhaps by an overeager volunteer unfamiliar with our internal systems. You're describing fraud?" I cut in. His mouth froze open like he forgot I could speak. The older lawyer stepped in. "We're not looking to escalate. We're simply hoping to resolve this quietly and fairly." I let the silence hang. One beat, too, then I finally spoke. "You underestimated the wrong person," I said. "You built a system assuming no one would ever come back. You thought time would erase the trail, but time just made the ink dry." Angela opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I tapped the thumb drive. "Everything you saw in that draft. That was a summary. This," I nodded at the device, "is the detail. Full path, metadata, redacted only for the state. Not for me." The lawyer started to say something else, but I cut him off with a single sentence. "I'm not here for threats. I'm here for terms." The air dropped 10 degrees. No one moved. Finally, the president spoke again, voice lower now. "What would those terms look like?" I looked at each of them one by one. Not angry, not triumphant, just level. "You don't get to ask that yet," I said. "Not until you admit you need them." And then I stood, left the drive on the table, still untouched. Let it sit there like the truth they spent 5 years avoiding. Let them feel the weight of it. They called me back the next day, this time to the top floor. The one with the frosted glass and imported espresso machines nobody actually knew how to use. I didn't wear a suit. I didn't bring a briefcase. I walked in wearing the same neutral button-down they gave me when I onboarded as a temporary finance reviewer, because I wanted them to remember exactly who they tried to erase. This room was different. No fake warmth, no cardigan smiles, just the president, the lead attorney, and Melissa, head of compliance, finally sitting at the table she once ruled from the shadows. Her face was stiff. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the look of someone trying to calculate how much of herself she could afford to lose and still keep her title. They didn't speak first. I let the silence do what silence does best. Strangled them slowly. Then I slid the offer across the table. 2 pages, 1 paragraph per demand. Not a manifesto, not a threat, just facts and consequences. Public transparency or private restitution with terms, their choice. They scanned it in silence. The first line, a full written acknowledgement of financial misconduct, signed and sealed, delivered to the Office of Consumer Affairs before Friday at noon. The second, 2. Private restitution of misdirected funds via internal bonus redistribution across neighborhoods affected by the deferred dues classification scheme, with anonymized confirmation sent to whistleblower counsel of record. The third, permanent role for the reporting party as head of financial integrity and internal compliance. No probation period, no end date. I looked up and spoke plainly. You choose the chapter. I'm fine with either, but I don't write in pencil. Melissa exhaled sharply, but said nothing. The president looked like he wanted to ask if he could negotiate bullet 3. He didn't. Smart man. The lawyer cleared his throat and nodded once. We'll proceed. Quietly. You'll proceed correctly, I replied. They asked no more questions. 2 days later, the document was delivered to the state, a very carefully worded internal policy breach report with language just vague enough to protect names, but just specific enough to be admissible if anyone ever reopened the case. The funds were redistributed. The names of the seasonal advisors quietly vanished from a ledger. Melissa went on personal leave, and I was issued a new contract, 1 page, no temporary clause, no renewal date, just a start date and a new title, Senior Director, Financial Integrity and Oversight. They tried to slip in a non-disparagement clause. I crossed it out in front of them. No one objected. The final clause read, "This agreement will remain in effect until terminated by mutual consent." I initialed next to it with the same pen I used on my temp contract. Revenge wasn't what this was. I didn't want their heads. I wanted my name back. I wanted the silence reversed and the damage acknowledged. I wanted my seed earned, not gifted. And I got it. Not with screaming, not with chaos, but with evidence, precision, leverage. That's the thing about tables. If you build your own, no one gets to decide if you belong at it. 3 weeks later, the boardroom looked almost identical to the one I sat in 5 years ago. Same pretentious glass table, same overpriced ergonomic chairs, same laughably abstract art no one could name. But the energy was different. The fear was still there, but now it wasn't mine. I walked in through the main door. Not as a guest, not as a temp, not even with a visitor badge. This time I was on the official attendee list, 2 lines beneath the president and 1 above the new VP of compliance. My nameplate read Senior Director, Financial Integrity and Oversight. I didn't smile when I saw it. I just pulled the chair back, took my seat, and opened the laptop they issued me last week. Brand new, still smelling like fresh plastic. As it booted, the desktop loaded. I changed the background to the audit logo. Just the clean white seal in the center of a black screen. Verification protects everyone. Nobody else noticed, but I didn't need them to. It was for me. The meeting began with the usual noise. Agenda points, acquisition updates, some buzz about ESG reporting timelines that in HOA speak meant new flowerbed budgets. Halfway through, the general counsel paused, cleared her throat, and turned slightly toward me. We'd like to formally introduce our newest appointment. She'll be overseeing all internal compliance reviews moving forward, including vendor transparency, audit prep, and any bonus structuring mechanisms. A few heads turned, some nodded, others winced. I caught Angela, the Old Rules director, sitting near the back. She looked thinner, less lacquered. Her eyes darted toward mine and then straight to the table. She didn't lift her head again. Then there was the former deputy treasurer, now just a name on the exit memo sent quietly last Thursday, resigned to pursue other interests, right? Interests like not testifying. I didn't acknowledge either of them. I didn't need to. Their ghosts sat next to them in empty chairs. The conversation moved on. Budgets, contracts, timelines. They didn't call on me much, but when they did, it wasn't to explain myself. It was to confirm accuracy. They didn't question the numbers anymore. They questioned everything else, but not the numbers. Because now the numbers were mine. After the meeting, the chairwoman passed by and murmured, "Glad we finally have someone who knows where the bodies are buried." I just nodded, said nothing. I waited until the room emptied, until the hallway chatter faded, and then I sat alone for a moment, just me and the soft hum of institutional amnesia finally corrected. I stared at the audit seal glowing on my laptop, the one they tried to bury, the one that brought me back, and I whispered more to myself than anyone else. Temporary. A small dry laugh escaped only for me. Outside, the neighborhood looked the same, perfectly manicured lawns exactly 2 inches tall, per the ridiculous rule Melissa once enforced while pocketing thousands. Residents waved as they walked their dogs, oblivious to how close their dues had come to vanishing forever. But I knew, and now the board knew I knew. The petty fines for flag colors and mailbox heights still existed, but the real theft was gone. Refunds started rolling out quietly, anonymized checks labeled adjustment credits that made neighbors smile without knowing why. Melissa's lawn service contractor disappeared from books. The Ghost LLC dissolved for good. And every quarter from now on, the reports would carry my name at the bottom. I stood up, closed the laptop, and walked out into the sunlight. The community center door clicked shut behind me with a finality that felt sweeter than any scream. 5 years of silence reversed in 90 days. Not with rage, not with drama, just precision. The HOA Karen who hissed, temporary, now watched her empire shrink from the sidelines. And the woman they tried to erase? She was permanent. The rules hadn't changed overnight, but the power had. Residents started asking questions at meetings. Board votes got recorded properly. The petty tyranny lost its teeth because someone finally held the receipts. I drove home past the perfectly painted signs that once felt like prison bars. Now, they just looked like paper. I parked in my driveway, the one with the flag exactly the right size, and smiled at the quiet street. Justice in an HOA isn't loud. It's quiet, patient, and devastatingly accurate. And this time it stuck. The neighborhood slept peacefully that night, unaware that the real story wasn't about grass height or holiday lights. It was about the woman who came back temporary and left owning the table. And somewhere in the distance, I could almost hear the faint echo of that hissed curse finally breaking against the truth. The end wasn't dramatic fireworks. It was a simple click of a laptop lid and the knowledge that some tables, once built, can never be taken away. I poured myself a glass of wine on the porch, watched the sun set over the perfectly compliant roofs, and raised it to no one in particular. Temporary, I whispered again, laughing softly into the evening air. The neighborhood was still the same on the surface. But underneath, the rot was finally gone. And I was the reason.